Welcome to Act 1, Scene 1. Our key question is, why does Shakespeare start this play, Macbeth, without Macbeth, but with three witches in this incredibly short scene? To understand that, we need to know the context of the time, 1605. This is performed in front of King James I at court. 2 years before, in 1603, King James had written the seminal text on discovering witches, Demonology. He had presided in only 1597 on witch trials in Berwick, accusing witches of trying to sink his ship and kill him by controlling the weather and storms. Once we know this, we can see that Shakespeare introduces the witches not necessarily because he believes in the power of the supernatural, but because King James does.
Our first introduction to this level of ambiguity is in the very first lines. When shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Suggesting clearly that the witches can control the weather. But let's look deeper. They're just looking at the gift of prophecy here. They know that they will meet again, and they're trying to ascertain which weather condition will be the most optimum to control Macbeth. It's not necessarily that they control the weather. We will see later that the witches take on the persona of the three Norns or the three Fates. These were not supernatural beings as they're often presented in this play, controlling Macbeth. The Norns and the Fates simply decided what would happen in the future. You'll also notice that Macbeth and Banquo only ever refer to the witches as the Weird Sisters, introducing an element of doubt that perhaps they are not witches at all. The word witch is used in the stage directions, but not in performance. In this first scene, the witches do carry out very witch-like things. So Shakespeare is really keen for us to know they have familiars, animals who have supernatural power because they are demons. The first witch has Grey Malkin, a grey or black cat. The second witch has Paddock, a toad. This will be relevant later when we start considering the nature of the witch's power. Actually, they are responding to their masters. These familiars, Grey Malkin and Paddock, are calling. They're ordering the witches, the Weird Sisters, about. The next thing that's crucial to understand about this scene is that the witches are given a different rhythm and a different meter. We will meet iambic pentameter later, but here the witches speak not in iambic pentameter but in trochaic tetrameter. Trochaic means that the stress happens on the first syllable of each pair, and tetrameter means that there are 7 syllables in the line. So when we read, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won, you can hear that rhythm. But it's also a really childish rhythm. It doesn't feel like a supernatural incantation. Now, it can be made to in performance, but it can also remind us of real childlike qualities. There are some other childlike motifs here. So not just the rhyme, but also the imagery. The familiars are animals. Well, it's children now who play with cuddly toys of animals. This is a childish image. Children's stories are full of animals. Perhaps the belief in witchcraft and the supernatural is a childish belief. Now, Shakespeare can't say that outright because King James obviously is a passionate believer in witchcraft, but Shakespeare could be ambiguous in his treatment of witchcraft. Again, this ambiguity as to whether Shakespeare himself believes the witches control Macbeth or whether they only have the gift of prophecy. However, it does introduce a brilliant language and structure feature which you're always going to mention. When characters have a trochaic stress on the first syllable of the two, when the, battles, lost and, won. When that happens, it signals to the audience that this character is probably doing something wicked. And you'll notice that when we come to Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Macduff, Banquo. They all slip into this at moments when they're having evil thoughts. Now we must consider the final couplet, which introduces the whole theme of ambiguity. Fair is foul and foul is fair. This is, if you like, the very thought process that's going to occupy every single character in the play. How can something be good also be evil? And that is where our grade 7 and above lies. When we start considering things from more than one point of view, grade 7 and above is just given to us. So pay attention to it as we go through the course. Here you will notice the fricatives, the repetition of the F sound. Super important, because when we say the F sound, we bare our teeth. It's an evolutionary mechanism that you'll see in monkeys and dogs and all sorts of animals. You bare your teeth in order to be threatening. And so that fricative, the F sound, always suggests to us a character's violent intentions. So we know from the beginning that the witches have designs on Macbeth. It's him they're going to meet. That their designs should lead to violence. But the big question is, do they cause that violence, or is it just Macbeth? And then we have that final image of the witches hovering on their broomsticks. And that's literally what Shakespeare means here. But have you ever seen one? Now, the people in Shakespeare's audience would be exactly the same. They'd be saying, oh, witches are supposed to hover on their broomsticks out in the full moon, aren't they? And then they'd say, that doesn't sound very realistic, does it? Now, in Elizabeth I's time, there was hardly any persecution of witchcraft at all. It wasn't so much a thing. But in King James's time, we now have paranoia. We now have witch hunts. We now have seeking the enemy within. And I think Shakespeare is drawing a parallel with the enemy within with the events of the Gunpowder Plot, which we'll come to in later episodes. So now you know Shakespeare has a personal purpose to gain financial wealth by seeking King James's patronage and showing him a play that he'll want to see. Remember, this play is put on at court, not at the Globe Theatre, but actually in front of King James and all the nobles. But that also gives us a second purpose. It is a political play. It's like putting on the play in front of the Houses of Parliament now. Everyone who has power is there in the audience watching this play. This is Shakespeare's opportunity to educate the king, but also to educate the nobles as well as entertain them. And that gives Shakespeare more than one purpose, and it leaves it open to ambiguity. Now, there is a further purpose we're going to need to consider with the witches, because they are all female in a patriarchal society. Now, as you know, a patriarchal society means a society run by males in their own interests and excluding the interests of females. And one of the reasons that the witches might turn to witchcraft, might turn to manipulation, is because that's the only way they can gain power in this sort of society, as we'll see every time we meet them. For now, I want to introduce you to the idea that perhaps Shakespeare is against this patriarchal view of women. We will look at his marriage to Anne Hathaway to support that in later videos. But for now, I want you to keep in mind that Shakespeare's writing this play in order to criticise the treatment of women in his own society. This is a theme we will come back to repeatedly. Now, this is very much a view that King James held. He believed that women were completely inferior to men because of original sin. He believed that Eve represents all that's wrong with women, and that women are much more prone to evil, as you can see in this quotation from Demonology. So, women are worse than men. Shakespeare will have to portray that in his portrayal of the Weird Sisters and Lady Macbeth. But remember, he also may have an alternative purpose, which is to discredit King James's view. That's why he needs to be ambiguous. He can't come straight out and show it, because King James will flat out disagree. He has to be subtle. He has to be nuanced. He has to be manipulative.